Hello, listeners, and welcome to the MKT AI podcast, which is a series of interviews talking about artificial intelligence and the impact on the sales and marketing industry. So, today, my guest is Lawrence Meyer, and he is a self-proclaimed revenue growth architect. So, welcome, Lawrence, to our podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And where are you today?
I'm in Chicago,
Located?
Illinois, in the U.S.
Okay. And how's the weather?
Weather's perfect. Can't complain. It's a beautiful fall day, and I'm looking forward to enjoying it at some point later this afternoon.
So, firstly, I was going to ask you about your role and the fact that you call yourself a revenue growth architect. So, can you tell us about that first?
Sure. My background is 3 decades of business to business building. And it really started with an opportunity more in a manufacturing setting that, the company was it was beyond a startup, but it had only been around for a couple of years. They had a couple $1 million in annual sales, and I happened to be the first sales representative at the organization. And over the course of 9 years, helped to develop that organization into a $250 million business. And so from, the point of coming on as a salesperson and rolling into hiring personnel and developing different product sets and working with marketing, like hiring your marketing, building out your marketing, aligning your marketing with your sales, bringing on pre-sales people. It's just a continuation of the snowball as it's going down the hill continues to expand. And as it's expanding, you need additional design and architecture to it so that it's not a one-dimensional piece of a go-to-market strategy includes a lot of different dimensions to it. And I learned that very early on in my career. But it happened to start with the manufacturing setting, and it moved into professional services with, a localization business, and then it moved into the software industry where, I really got to, again, work at the very ground level, first salesperson, first go-to-market person, and over the course of 17 years, helped to build a business that was innovative and creative and very fast-paced and driven for success. And part of that success was taking care of our clients, really building a strong community that when you had a user conference, the users wanted to come to it. And it wasn't a matter of having if I can use the term, having a bitch session. But it was really, bringing these people in and getting their feedback, and they loved coming to that event. They loved having a community that they could build with and enjoy the partnering, not only with the vendors who I was representing, but with each other. And so I think the architecture comes from, starting way back when in the early 1980s and moving all the way forward to 2025 with how things have changed architecturally, but also with technology. So there's a lot of moving balls in the air there.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, I started myself in sales in the 80s. I know I don't look old enough, but it's true. And the landscape has changed, obviously, unrecognisably. But it's interesting, I think, how many things change and yet don't change because, channels have changed, routes to market have changed, the media that we use has changed. But really, is still sales and faces some of the same challenges in my world anyway, but we're not talking about me, we're talking about you. So I'm interested. First of all then, across your career, what would you say would be your kind of number one thing that makes a company's growth successful?
That's a unique question. I think there's so many different attributes that help to make it up, but the number one thing I think is just grit. It's having the desire to say, I am all in, and finding ways to overcome obstacles that hit you literally every day. And so whether it's financial obstacles, like we don't have enough, our war chest is not big enough to do what we want to do. Okay, well, trim things back and get creative. There's lots of companies out there that want to work with others, and they'll do it successfully for a short period or a temporary period at a discount, and figure those things out. I think it's really building partnerships with all different kinds of companies and being straight as an arrow. You need to be a trustworthy person out there in the community. And when people ask you to do something and you say you'll do it, you follow through on it. And so, there's, like I say, there's a lot of things that go with it, but I think that grit or the passion behind, like, I have a dream and I'm going to follow this thing through to the end is a very critical piece of your ability to move forward and be successful.
Grit. All right. Yeah, I call that kind of tenacity and survival as well.
Yes.
So, and what would you say is the biggest challenge?
Well, for the opportunities that I've gone through, for the experiences that I've had, I think the two biggest obstacles are bringing people on board, especially at an early stage, that have a professional degree. And I don't mean like an educational degree, I mean like their experience is excellent. We want to bring this person on. And generally, that person is far higher paid than what you could ever afford. And so, how do you bring in expertise and literally have them be interested to be with you? And so, when I started with a company out of Southern California back in the mid 2000s, I happened to be coming out of an area where I had had actually at that point, I had already had a couple of decades of experience and success. I had been in leadership for multiple companies. We had done super well, and the CEO and founder of this business was super driven. When I talk about grit, like, she had a steel backbone. And like, I ended up taking a cut. I sacrificed on my income to be able to make the move. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, or probably what she wanted it to be. But for me, as an executive, I didn't have to make this move. And, I did take a sacrifice. The other side of it was she held something it wasn't a spiritual thing. It was, there's something unique about this person that I can gain and I can learn from. And even though the short-term finances went in the gutter, the long-term finances worked out super well. And so I think really being able to be the leader that you need to be in order to bring people on your boat, that I don't have a reason to come to you. I don't need to be with you. And I'd have to sacrifice in order to do that. Most people don't want to do that. And in a lot of cases, people may take the short, like, okay, I'll come to it for a while, but it's a long-term battle. Like, for me, there was a vision there that was like, okay, I've been an executive. Like, the first company I started with was at the very beginning, but it wasn't a startup. It was just a very, very early on organization. I happened to be a part of a leadership team that did really well, but it was a 9-year process. When I got into this one, it was almost 2x that. So it's not an overnight success, and you really have to be in it for the long haul. But the dream and the vision there was, I haven't had an opportunity to be at a startup company, especially in the technology sector, and see it go through. I didn't care whether it went through private equity or not. I did care, though, that we would go through an IPO. And so the method and the way that we ended up getting our money, at first it was like she's bootstrapping this thing and fighting for every nickel that she can get. And every day that is an elongated sales cycle, she's crying in her beer because where's the money? And so finally the money started coming in, and then we were able to start signing on some partnerships. And then she had a lot of different private equity and venture capital firms that wanted to court her or date her as the CEO of the business. And about 7 years down the road, she finally chose a firm that was private equity. They invested a couple $100 million into the business for 50% of it. And another 3 years, we IPO'd. And it was a very healthy IPO when the market for venture capital and private equity getting IPOs were terrible. And so we happened to be one of the shining stars in 2016 when that occurred. And it was a highlight in my career. And so I just think that the whole, like, bringing in the expertise that you need and really being able to offer them something beyond money is critical. Because for most executives that have already, like, cut their teeth on other ventures, you've got to have something unique, and you don't have the money, at least not now. You can offer them, the potential of, like, hey, I'll give you a stock or some type of equity stake in the business. But even that is like, it's low probability that you're going to hit pay dirt. So what else can you offer them? And if you're a really good leader and you can offer them, ways to be able to grow their experience and challenge them in new ways that they haven't been challenged, I think you've got a good opportunity there.
But, a big leap of faith for business owners, as you say. If you're not Google or Facebook or Microsoft, or a big brand, you can't attract people in quite the same way. When you're an SME or medium-sized company or company startup, it's very challenging, as you say, and it takes a lot of guts. But fortunately, the lady that you worked with obviously had the kahunas, as they say.
That's right. She did.
Yeah, good for her, and very good advice to business owners. So I want to talk about tech, obviously, because the landscape has changed dramatically. I think you're probably like me. We didn't have mobile phones or even laptops when we started out in sales. And the whole landscape has changed. First of all, we had the internet come in. We hadn't even heard of that, right? And email, and that messed us up, for a while. Especially if I was in publishing at the time, selling advertising space, and then all of a sudden, people were giving it away cost per click. Oh my God, how do I compete with that? I'm selling ads for £15,000. And you can buy Google AdWords. It wasn't even called Google AdWords then, I don't think, for cost per click. So that was a big change in my career, but nothing as big as this AI phenomenon that's coming in now. I mean, it's all over. But allegedly, and 90% of businesses say that they want to implement AI, but only something like 1% has done it. So there's a major transition that's going to happen. And entrepreneurial businesses like mine are pretty scared, but also I think there's many opportunities. So how do we really transition from being scared, taking the opportunity, and really kind of AI upping our business, as it were? So so I just really wanted to kind of hear your thoughts. Firstly, maybe you could tell me what you think that the challenges are going to be.
In my opinion, the challenges are going to be finding technology that is actually going to stick around for a while. Right now, it's like if I looked out back in my backyard 3 months ago, 4 months ago, most of it was green. I've got an in-ground pool. I have plants that came through last summer and fall and winter, and they're perennials, they're around. There's some areas that my wife grew these zinnias, and back in the spring there was nothing there. And then in the summer, they grow from 6 inches to 12, 18, some are 4 feet tall. And man, like there's a ton of color, there's lots of butterflies, it's beautiful. Well, now we're entering into the fall and the zinnias are going away. And I think there's going to be some similarities there. Not that the zinnias are going to turn into these long-term perennials, but there's a season right now that AI is growing unbelievable. And it's beautiful. Like there's lots of very cool technology out there. The issue is we're going to be grabbing onto some of these things. We're going to form contracts with them, and they're either going to get acquired, they're going to go to sleep because they didn't have the grit that we talked about before. They had obstacles that they faced that they couldn't overcome, whether that was competition or their own financial backing. They couldn't find the funding that they wanted. And so I think for small businesses, there's a lot of emerging. And I have it for my own business. I have a whole section of my firm that includes emerging AI. And I am very actively working with these companies to use them myself, like explore. And when I was with the manufacturing company, we had a very strong percentage of our budget that went towards research and development. And it's not a term that's highly used in the technology business, but for me and my business, I believe in R&D. And I think part of that is going to be like looking at these different technologies, especially in the go-to-market, whether that's marketing or sales or customer success, any of those 3 major pillars, and figuring out how do we do things more efficiently with better productivity, because if not, we will lose out. Like we're going to be run over by some Mack truck. And it's not going to be a fun experience. So being able to increase our research and development and experiment with things and toss out the things that seem like low probability and really grab and invest in the things that are higher probability is going to be critical. So I think that's the biggest obstacle, is just what things do we potentially invest in that that become passé.
And also, how do we trust the emerging suppliers, the emerging developers of AI when they're all over the place, and some have got big funding behind them, so, some are bootstrapped. But if you see a piece of technology and you think, wow, that's going to be amazing for my business, how do you trust that they're going to be still around in 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever?
Right. And I think in some cases, it's going to be a matter of like, I grew up on the farm, and so we always had this term that was like, make hay while the sun's shining. And I think you do that. Like if you've found a really good opportunity with a company, take advantage of it while it exists, because it may not be there tomorrow. And you should maybe, I haven't done this myself, but maybe have a short list of like, I choose company A, but if company A goes down, I'm going with company B, and I've got my ready-to-made tech stack.
So we talk about a couple of challenges there, but the main thing is, what are the opportunities? How is this going to change our lives as business owners, as salespeople, as marketing people?
In my, I'd say humble opinion is the intelligence that AI delivers is incredible. And so, you were talking about pre-internet, pre-email, pre-laptops as salespeople. And yeah, I very much remember the Rolodex, literally a Rolodex with little paper cards that you could spin, and it had about 200 pieces of paper on it with your handwritten name and phone number that, wasn't a mobile number. It was an office line. Maybe it had the executive assistant's name on it that you wrote and made sure that you made good friends with her or him. So when you can now go out to the web and put in someone's name and title and company name, and then it'll pull up a whole bunch of information on them. And then you can store it into your CRM if you think that's still a viable option, or lots of other cool technologies that utilize concepts of CRM, but are actually advancing beyond that. It's insane. And so for me, like, I use LinkedIn every day of the week. I'm in there probably every hour of every day of the week that I'm not, sleeping. Now, they've done a really good job of trying not to have people automate being able to bring data out of that, but it's really still the best source because people are managing their own profile. And so
Exactly.
there's lots of new technology that are trying to grasp and figure out ways on how to break the LinkedIn nut. And it's happening. Like, it literally is happening. I don't know how LinkedIn's going to actually, like, in the long run, protect themselves and the people that are in it. But there's obviously hundreds of millions of people that are in it, maybe billions at this point. And it's incredible as to who is there. And now you can use all these different filters that say, well, this person's not even active. Like, in fact, sorry to say, but I've got 2 different people that were very close to me who both passed away, and their LinkedIn profiles are still alive on the community today. And so it's interesting to see, well, if you turn on the filter to say, well, who of these people have actually engaged in the community in the last 30 days? Well, then tons of people fall out. But lots of different interesting ways to be able to utilize technology and figure out like who's active and who's not, who's got their stuff up to snuff and who's not. So I don't know if I'm going down a wrong avenue.
No, absolutely. It's one very close to my heart because, the services that we provide for clients ourselves is, we go out, we find the data, we go out and we reach out on LinkedIn, we make telephone calls to prospects, but all of that process is quite clunky. That's the point, isn't it? You've got to go out and bring the data in. You've got to go out and send invitations to connect. You've got to then monitor that. And, and yes, you can use tools, as you say, automated tools, to do that process. But everybody's always afraid that LinkedIn's going to block their accounts, So I think, how are LinkedIn really going to accept AI? Because in an ideal world, you'll have a bot going, here's a bit of data, let's have a look at LinkedIn profile, let's compare, the 2 pieces of information. Is it consistent? What can we pull from that? What can we pull from that? How do we bring that then into our CRM, maybe our outbound email technology? And then how do we then make appointments to support our salespeople? And they've just got to get on a Zoom call or a Teams call and actually do the end sale. That's the dream, isn't it? Pulling all of those pieces together. And, there are tools out there that are starting to do bits and pieces of that. But in my experience so far, they're very expensive. or they want you to have a lot of users or what have you. So, for the SME right now, that's still quite a challenge to get into that. And also, it's not working as it should yet. I've been using an AI SDR that's, as a test on a campaign, to do responses, and sometimes it's sending out complete rubbish. So, it's not there yet.
Yeah.
And I think, this is part of the challenge. It's, which AI do we choose? Who do we go with? And then for me, there's the kind of acceptance of it, compliance issues as well. So, what are your thoughts, in terms of the general acceptance of AI when we're reaching out to businesses to try and do business with them? For example, a robotic outbound call. What are our challenges going to be in terms of acceptance?
Well, that hits personally very close to home. So Tracey and I have had some interesting conversations, to those of you out there listening, because REVGEN is a strategic partner to a firm, and actually I happen to be a co-founder in the firm, called Gnome AI. And we've developed a technology that is AI-based, outbound, automated cold calling. And so at this point, it's still a new venture. We just started it up earlier here in 2025. We've got a partnership with a firm out of Europe, out of Serbia, who I just adore, the team that's there. And it originally started out where they called me. I happened to be their target. And so I pick up the phone because it's coming, the number that's calling me is a 312, which is my same area code. And I know that this is a Chicago number. It may be a prospect who I haven't spoken with ultimately. So I'm picking it up, hoping to have a call with a future client. And it happens to be a potential vendor. And I have a multi-minute conversation with this person that ended up being an AI assistant. And I honestly didn't know the difference. And so she's qualifying me on this call and asked me if I want to visit with the CEO. And I said, yes. And then before we get off, she, just acknowledges that, hey, just so you know, I'm an AI assistant and we're very much, excited and looking forward to having this conversation. So we've got you set up on, such and such a day at this time, have fun in the call. Then I get on the call with the CEO and he's selling me on his AI software development firm, which I didn't need. I could care less. I'm not in the business of hiring an AI software development firm at all. I'm not doing that. However, I am in the idea stage of I'm looking for something to run aside from my own firm that would be kind of like going back to my old days in this startup software firm that we were talking about before that, started in the mid 2000s. So I'm past that. I've gotten through the PE and the IPO. I'm now doing my own thing, which is a fractional business. Love doing that. And I'm bringing on these AI technologies. I have the conversation with this guy. And I'm like, I really think you're sitting on a gold mine. This is a huge market. It is so hard for lead gen agencies and just small businesses in general to get traction with any company. And I think everyone's either going down the LinkedIn route or the automated email route, and millennials and Gen Zs, they're not in love with having to cold call people. So it's hard to find these young people that want to, deal with the strife of calling someone who doesn't appreciate their call. They're dealing with conflict. They don't want to deal with conflict. And even if you do, generally those people are the ones that are going to be fast tracking into some kind of a managerial AE sales role. So it's hard to hire them and keep them there. All that being said, building out an AI application for outbound cold calling completely makes sense to me. And so we've developed this technology. It has the ability per bot or per agent to make 2,500 calls a month. You can do it for a quarter of what you're going to pay a full-time SDR or BDR. It has 3 times the output of it. It's monetarily speaking, this is a no-brainer. But you're hitting on something that is kind of the silver cord here, Tracey, and that is, from a compliance standpoint, how do you do this? Dealing with GDPR, it's a 100% no-go. Dealing with TCPA in the US, you're supposed to have approval, like written consent or some kind of a check the box from the person that you're calling. So from the software provider standpoint, I am providing an opportunity to companies out there to have a tool to be able to go and utilize this channel. If you're only doing LinkedIn, you've got one channel. If you're doing LinkedIn and email, you're doing two channels. If you're including phone calling, it's very much an omni-channel or a diversified approach, which I believe in. So how do I get this in there? Well, until you really get the consent going or figure out a creative way on how to have a consent form on your website, on any event that you do. If it's a webinar, you need a consent form. And they're basically checking the box to say, yes, I want to participate in this event, but also for other marketing events and or outbound phone calls by an agent, by an AI assistant. It may be, the number of checks that you get or the number of signups you get for these events may decrease for a while, but ultimately my belief is AI will win out the day. Like, it's not going away. And like I say, there's a lot of uphill battles for human SDRs to be filling, especially like the cost of it to hire an SDR and the productivity of an SDR versus an AI SDR miles apart. And so I think ultimately we will need to figure out and work with government agencies as to how to do this effectively and how to have, I guess, the client, because ultimately we want to be respectful of people's time and their privacy. This application is tied into the U.S. Federal Registry for do not call lists. So anybody that gets imported into this list that has previously set themselves up for do not call, it is known in there and you're not able to make that call in this application. So from that perspective, we're 100% in the clear, and your company, whoever the client is, using the tool is in the clear. It's just, okay, but now moving forward, you're still making calls, and I'm giving my own, kind of Achilles heel here. You're still making calls that aren't checking the box of a consent form. So you're taking a little bit of a risk there as to how you want to do it, and that's 100% on you. We're giving you the tool to use it, and you use it how you want to use it. We recommend you get consent. It's kind of like the beer, Budweiser's always saying, drink appropriately and responsibly. And we're in the same boat. You've got this, you can use it how you want, be careful with it.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'm quite well read on GDPR and PECA from a European standpoint, not so much, in terms of legislation for the US, but, I know it is similar. And effectively, in GDPR and PECA is how you use data and GDPR is how you store data. But I think it's PECA that actually says that, you cannot make robotic calls without consent. That's the legislation. And it does vary from country to country because everybody around the world has their own little variations on data protection. Sadly, I've also studied that. Essentially, what if we're going to do large scale, outbound, for example, we're going to ramp up our AI SDRs to make more and more outreach. In my world, in my telemarketing bureau world, we get something like a 10% contact rate to call. So you've got to make 1,000 outbound calls to speak to 100 people, and how many sales reps? I mean, obviously it's what we do in the telemarketing companies, but how many sales reps, are going to sit there and make 1,000 outbound calls? As you say, they don't do it now, do they? So yes, you can do that. You can ramp that up, with technology, but the compliance, is what is potentially going to stop that in its tracks unless you build up a consent-based database that says, you can make a robotic call to these people. So this is where I feel a real stumbling block at the moment, to really roll this out. We've got to start, collecting, consent. And of course, it's hard to get consent to make an outbound call to sell somebody something anyway as a human being, and then we're going to ask them, well, actually, do you want an AI bot to call you? So, these are real challenges, and it will affect, I think, the, time for the uptake. But as you say, it's happening fast, and we've got to go with it, and navigate some of these challenges and see where it takes us. Because if we sit back not adopting it, then everybody else is going to be more competitive, be getting more business in, be more efficient, effective, whatever. And we
Yep.
can sit there going, well, we don't think it's going to work, like people did back in the day when the internet came along. I was in publishing at that time, and some publishers, media owners, really embraced the change. Some went into events, and some died in the process. And that was relatively mild compared to what we've got here now, as a with AI coming along. So I think it's a big subject. We can't cover it all off in an hour. I wish we could. So anyway, we're talking about challenges, we're talking about opportunities, of which there are many. If you could wave a magic wand right now, in your business world, and I think particularly, let's say, in terms of revenue generation, and growing businesses, lead generation, revenue generation, what would that look like? What would that magic wand look like? What would it do?
Gosh. Well, and I'm sorry for a hesitation on the response. You're catching me off guard here, Tracy. So it's a really good
Sorry.
question. No, it's a very good question. I think, what would the magic wand look like for go-to-market delivery? I mean, honestly, like, AI's there. I think the magic wand would be that you actually have an all-in-one tool, like an all-in-one operating system, that you don't have to go to 25 different product companies and form contracts and have faith that they're going to follow through. And so many like cultures and pricing mechanisms, and like almost a faith-based initiative with each and every vendor that you deal with. And so, I mean, if I could wave a magic wand and have it be like perfect world, it'd be, I have one vendor that I absolutely love, and they cover my whole go-to-market schema. And that would start with demand generation and brand awareness, and go all the way through NPS scores with my customer success teams. It would include every turn, every channel. That would include LinkedIn and email and phone calls. It would include my CRM data. It would have, it's an all-inclusive environment that would also take into effect things like predictive analytics for forecasting and customer journeys. And I honestly think, like, the biggest hurdle that people have today, that especially small businesses, but I think all businesses, and maybe in the tech industry, SaaS businesses, is a lot of the clientele have gotten sick of the subscription model. And so moving to something that's more value-based is of interest and more attractive to the clients. But I think, bringing in net new business acquisition is a sore spot for many small businesses. And so really figuring out, like, how do I turn that back on? Back in the mid 2000s, when we were moving from an on-prem to a SaaS application, the biggest issue was IT teams, not because I was selling into the accounting, into the corporate controllers mecca. The only time that we'd be really running into like severe headwinds were when we're having to bring in the IT team, and they're like, we control our software. We're not going to be bringing in something from the outside. And it took a couple of years for that to pass. And then before you knew it, it was like, we would never bring in an on-prem application. Everything's going to be subscription. Okay, well, now fast forward at 10 years, and SaaS is having its headwinds really met. And I think there's new models that need to be taken on. But the new acquisition, even for the company that I was at, is under severe scrutiny because there's better and newer models out there. So I think the next thing to add to that is, from a customer success standpoint, do we really understand the customer's journey? If I had 1,000 clients, do I really have it mapped out? I know that I created a way for my clients to have a journey, but did they all follow the exact same journey? And at what point did they start falling off and going to my competition? And I should be able to, because I've got enough repetitions here, it should be statistically proven as to like what turned them on, what turned them off. When did they leave me? If they came back, when did they come back? And what were the signals that did that? And I think these are another part of the magical wand that would be like the whole scenario. Bring all of this into one beautiful spectrum, and it's not leaving that out. Like, it has to be a part of it.
Amazing. It sounds to me, and it will probably sound to many of our listeners. Very comprehensive, quite complicated, and probably expensive. So my final question would be, if I'm a business owner or leader in a bigger business that's responsible for, sales and marketing and the whole customer journey, where do I start?
Well, if I can take a cue from myself, we were talking earlier in regards to having passion and grit and finding ways to overcome obstacles. And a lot of times you want to hire expertise that you can't afford. In some cases, you have leaders of organizations that, like, I'm a doctor. I'm creating a health application. I don't know technology. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a doctor. But I know what I want to be able to put out there. So you need to bring in the expertise. My recommendation is either A, find that person and do like my old CEO founder did, and that was like persuade them that you've got the chutzpah, as you had said before, Tracey, to be able to bring them in and guide them in a new direction. The other side of it is there are lots of awesome fractional leaders out there today. I happen to be, I think, one of them, but there's many out there. And find one that you groove with, that you jive with, and bring them in. They're a fraction of the cost of a full-time person. You could even incentivize them to say, look, I can't afford your full price, but what I would do is something more that's like, it does offer them equity. It brings them in closer to what you have. And the fractionals, they're not consultants. These folks they're partnering with you, and they're practitioners, they're operators. So bring them in so that they can help guide you and instruct you and actually be a part of your leadership team. I think it's a really good way to do it. And like I say, there's lots of them out there. There's so many. I have a lot of peers and a lot of friends out there that they were sitting in some pretty rich positions 2, 3, 4 years ago. And then through COVID, and like I was talking about before, the SaaS model has hit a tough time. There's lots of excellent leaders out there who were let go. Like, they were too expensive. And these companies could find lower cost, younger employees to come in, and they got the boot. I mean, these people aren't going back into the corporate world because they don't want to have to go through the grind again, and they're doing their own thing. And so I would highly recommend that you find one of these experts out there that you really like and bring them in as part of your team, not full-time, but part-time. And if ultimately it works, then you do bring them in full-time, but let that mature and grow over time. I think that's the best way to do it.
Excellent, excellent advice. Well, we're running out of time. We've talked a lot, but nowhere near enough. This subject could have run and run. Maybe we'll have to have you on another time down the line.
I love that.
See what has changed. So thank you for your wisdom and your opinions and your insights. And thank you, and we'll talk again soon.
Tracey, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Lawrence.